Asante sana. Thank you.
Yes, and I mean, we've had an interesting couple of days in the news, not least in your neck of the woods. We'll come
Yes.
to that shortly, but let's go to the African continent, which is the basis of this program. And our first news story today comes from basically Africa, in the sense that we've got businesses now threatening the United States and China now threatening a railway boom of sorts on the African continent. Why does that make the news? According to The Economist, Sino-American tensions are playing out on the tracks, it says. And the lead begins. Every inhabitant of Thies, wrote a Senegalese novelist, Ousmane Sembene, in 1960, depended on the railway. Like many African cities, Thies was a product of the continent's first and colonial era rail revolution. The French built railway that ran through its stretch from the Senegalese port of Dakar to Mali, deep in the Sahel, ferrying peanuts, gold, and other raw materials to the coast for export. It goes further. Africa's entire rail network is today only slightly larger than France and Germany combined. In West Africa, only one cross-border line is still working. By one estimate, investments of up to 105 billion a year until 2050 are needed if Africa's network density is to match China's or India's. Yet, between 2012 and 2022, total private investment in rail infrastructure was no more than 6 billion, according to the World Bank. This is where it gets interesting. In Angola, a 1,300-kilometer colonial railway from the port of Lobito across the border to the copper mines of Congo is being revamped. In Zambia, officials hope that 800 kilometers of track will soon be laid from the northern copper belt to the border with Angola. The American government is funding at least 250 million of the 2.3 billion price tag, making the Lobito corridor, as the projects are collectively known, the largest ever infrastructural investment on the continent. It is also a proving ground for the theory that competition between West and China will benefit Africans. First things first, let me get Brother Milton's reaction before I go further.
Okay. Well, first of all, you cannot talk about Ousmane Sembene and mention his mention of railroad without elaborating that he was anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist at the same time. It's just nonsense. You're abusing his name by saying that. It's like mentioning Nelson Mandela and not saying that he was a champion fighter against apartheid. It's complete nonsense, disingenuous, right? Correct. It almost leaves the implication that Sembene would have supported more building of such railroads under colonial rule, and that in fact he was a capitalist, which of course he was not. In fact, he was a socialist. He was even Marxist and Leninist, I think. So that's disingenuous, number one. Number two, you cannot talk about colonial railways and leave the impression as if they were beneficial. It's completely absurd. First of all, tens of thousands of Africans died building those railroads. I think building the one from the coast to Brazzaville in French Congo, as many as 20,000 Africans died before that railroad was finished construction, and then they were not allowed to use the trains themselves, exclusively for Europeans.
Yes.
So obviously, these are people who have no empathy or sympathy for the African experience. So that alone raises red flags for what is to come after that. And then, of course, it goes on to lay the same neocolonial construct. In this case, not even neocolonial, it's colonial. The colonial railways were built to go to the location of the resources and to extract the resources out of the country. And that's exactly what they're doing once again. They are calling this a boom. It's not a boom. It's very specific. These monies being invested are not are throwing darts against the wall. You know, they know where it's going. They know exactly what they're going to get for these investments. There's no risk at all. The returns are going to be very, very, very soon and very, very fast. Because as you know, the countries mentioned produce much of the world's essential mineral resources, particularly in this era of electric cars, you know, copper and cobalt, you know. Once you mention Zambia, Angola, Congo, that's it. You have the market cornered. And that is why the United States is once again making this significant investment in on the African continent, such an investment that it's never made before. As you know, most of the major railway construction projects in Africa, whether it was the one in, beginning with the one in Tanzania in the 1970s, Tanzania-Zambia Railroad, that was built by China, the major one in Ethiopia, and then the one going from Ethiopia to Djibouti as well, that was built by China, the one in Kenya, that was built by China. So now the US, of course, is doing it because the United States is afraid that China was cornering the market for copper and for cobalt. And that's why the US is spending this kind of money.
So you don't see any altruistic spending to...
Oh, absolutely not. And actually, we don't even need that. But what we need is actually the kind of money that the economist is talking about. What was it, 100 billion?
105 billion.
Billion per year until 2050.
2050.
If that kind of money were put, that kind of money went into building factories in African countries, can you imagine how many jobs would be created? You know, a lot of these railway jobs, a lot of them are going to go to technical people who are going to be, well, if the railway is built by, traditionally it's been built by China, and as you know, they brought a lot of Chinese workers. So imagine if they're putting their money, they're going to bring many Western so-called experts for these jobs as well. We need investment that creates jobs for Africans, investments that create sustaining jobs. Because once you built the railway, okay, now you're extracting resources and you're selling it at prices that you yourself don't control, right?
Yes.
Let's say, 10, 15, 20 years, we shift to a new product. Now nobody is that much interested in your copper and cobalt. As you know, with these resources, the price is cyclical. There's always a peak, and then when they shift to other products, then of course there's a drop, as you said. We can't depend on that kind of economic model for development. We need to create factories, build factories that use our resources to produce, and now we are producing a lot more. And now you're actually, first of all, increasing the domestic economic activity within each and every African country. Okay. And then after that, so you're increasing intra-African trade amongst African countries and between African countries. You see, and that's what we need to do.
Okay, I would like to touch on this last aspect here. America hopes rail investment can pull the resource-rich region into its orbit and secure the minerals critical for the transition to green energy, which is what you alluded to earlier. Africa is home to around 30% of the world's mineral resources. Zambia and Congo are Africa's largest producer of copper, which is used in solar panels and wind turbines. Congo is the world's largest producer of cobalt, which is used in batteries for electric vehicles. And Angola has 36 of the 51 minerals critical to renewable energy technologies.
Think about that.
Can you imagine?
We're sitting on all the wealth we need. We just don't have control over it. We don't use it to produce the stuff that they used it to produce, and then they sell it back to us at exponentially higher prices.
Now, there was one part that stood out to me in this article, which is the last part, then we'll move on. It's that the government in Guinea, like those in Angola and Zambia, is keen to reduce the dominance of Chinese mining companies and to diversify its foreign partners. Last year, it renegotiated the license for a 20 billion iron ore mine in order to ensure that a consortium of Chinese firms teams up with Rio Tinto, a Western mining giant, to jointly finance more than 600 kilometers of fresh tracks from the pit to the sea. The mining companies are expected to provide freight and passenger services, said Gerard Reinberger, the managing director of the Rio Tinto's Guinea operations. The idea, notes a Western diplomat, is that the so-called Trans-Guinea Railway should not just take iron to the port, but open up the interiors of the country as well. Are we supposed to believe that?
Well, that's ideally what we want, but that is still not sufficient. Just moving Africans from one part of the country to another in itself does not translate into development. So missing in this entire article is industrialization. Railways in Europe, in the United States, led to the growth of urban centers. They brought these workers who were then employed in these factories, who were then producing manufactured output. It was increasing the GDP of these countries, right? And the GNP, because now they're increasing their exports as well. And that's what Africa needs. And that, of course, is what is not going to be mentioned in this article.
Right. This is The Economist, after all, the money paper.
Right. So that's a little bit of public relations to say, oh, see, now we're even talking economic development. What economic development? Just by moving people from one part of the country to the other?
They're moving people from one side of the country to use them, just like the mineral resources. They're moving from the pits to the port. So the people are just enhancing that movement, and so they're not. It's not like the economic fabric of that community or the country in general is going to benefit from the entire project. After all, you've been given your pittance.
It's nonsense. It's like, okay, before we could not move people from Nairobi to Mombasa on the coast. Now we have a railroad. Now we're going to be moving people from Nairobi to Mombasa, from Mombasa back to Eldoret or Nakuru or Kisumu in Kenya. And that's supposed to translate automatically into economic development. It's just pure nonsense,
Well, we're supposed to be elite, so we're supposed to be thinking like them. Because once you see the names of these countries in newspapers, that means they're aware of you, and somehow that should translate into understanding that you're part of the global system.
Right, but they know how they developed, and they know how Africa could really develop. So when they leave it out, it's intentional to continue to mislead people. I say, whenever you read anything in the Western press, the Western media, just remember one thing. Are they talking about building factories in Africa and removing that dependency that Africa has on manufactured products? If that's not mentioned, the article is worthless. It's just propaganda. It's public relations.
You're way too kind. Okay. From Angola, we move south of Angola and we go to the country of Nelson Mandela, South Africa. And in the next article, it reads from the Financial Times and reads, Cyril Ramaphosa vows to turn the country into a construction site. Now, spare me. Presence of pro-market Democratic Alliance in President Coalition is fueling business optimism. Wow. South Africa's in the lead, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered a strong pro-business message in his first State of the Nation address as head of a coalition government, singling out the country's economic revival as the main priority of his final 5-year term. Ramaphosa pledged to re-industrialize South Africa after a decade of GDP growth of less than 1%. He pledged to cut the red tape that prevented skilled foreigners from getting work visas, overhaul dysfunctional municipalities, and massively increase the scale of investment in infrastructure, a new role under the DA's Dean McPherson, the new Minister of Public Works. The echoes of what McPherson told the parliament the day before, in which he revealed plans to attract 10 billion rand, about 57 million US dollars in private sector investment to build new energy, communications, water, and transport infrastructure. Now, contrast this with what Ramaphosa will then say. Where is it? There's a part there where, okay, it's at the top, where he is saying he intends to, let me see. Yeah. Okay, so Ramaphosa is saying, we have a clear intention to turn our country into a construction site. Ramaphosa said, we want to see yellow equipment throughout the country and cranes with roads being built, as well as dams, bridges, houses, schools, and hospitals. On the other hand, Mr. McPherson is saying the private sector investment is to build new energy, communications, water, and transport infrastructure. Who are we supposed to believe here?
Okay, well, both of them are basically speaking the same language. So there's not much contradiction there. They're talking about investment and they're just elaborating different sectors of the infrastructural system. And obviously, I have my reservations in terms of what was mentioned even earlier. Number one, first of all, before I even go into the what they're talking in terms of the economic model or policies that they're going to pursue.
Yep.
Which publication is this?
This is Financial Times.
Financial Times. Okay, so the Financial Times and the Economist and the New York Times have been, of course, playing the race card in a very clever way. Whenever they say okay, so this one, they got much more explicit. Before they formed the coalition, it was the pro-business, Democratic Alliance, right?
Okay.
That's the party, the DA. So now, Financial Times is telling us that there's optimism, right? Because of the presence of the pro-business Democratic Alliance. In plain English for listeners who are not yet up to par in terms of translating what these, Western European media mean when they say what they say, let me translate it to them. The presence of the pro-business Democratic Alliance in the government is generating hope. They're saying the presence of Europeans in the government of Cyril Ramaphosa. They're saying that if these things were just being said by Africans and you had African ministers, then there would be no ground for optimism. But now you can be a little more hopeful because now we have European South Africans involved in government. And that's what they mean when they say, well, of course, they can't say it. They can't say now that, there are actually 6 ministries reserved for this white party. The prospects are much more better now. So we have some hope, you see. All right, so I wanted to get that off the ground very quickly. And then let's go to the other part. As sisters and brothers know, there has been many eruptions of xenophobic display in South Africa,
Yeah.
where African sisters and brothers from other parts of the continent have been attacked. They've been accused of taking jobs from South Africans and contributing to their impoverishment. Of course, they're directing their anger at fellow people who are also picking the crumbs that drop off the table. They're not directing their anger at those that monopolize wealth in South Africa, which of course include the European elite, as well as the new African elite, of which Cyril Ramaphosa himself is a key member of that, new black bourgeoisie. So what do they say? They know that you can't be saying, South Africa should open up its doors, its borders. So they qualify it. They say skilled foreigners, right? You're stopping skilled foreigners with your bureaucracy. No, we agree with you. Let these Africans stay in Nigeria, stay in Zambia, Zimbabwe. We don't need any more Africans here. But
skilled
foreigners is another, of course, euphemism for European expatriates. You see. So if any listener was careless enough, reader enough to pick that up, that is the second thing. And then, of course, in terms of if they're going to build the infrastructure, and they're already telling you that where the money is going to be coming from, it's going to be coming from outside, right? In what shape and form? Are you going to be increasing the debt burden for South Africans? And of course, the low-income folks who are going to be taxed, because everybody's taxed, at a certain level, right? We'll have to repay this debt. And in terms of creating jobs, yes, initially there could be some upsurge, even though I wonder you don't have total confidence in a party whose leadership is essentially white, in telling me that the European Minister of Public Works is going to be sort of egalitarian when people are being hired for these new jobs in the infrastructure and rebuilding in South Africa. So I wait to see that. Okay. But to me, at the end of the day, anything that South Africa does without addressing the issue of the land, I see it as temporary and superficial. And I don't think that Ramaphosa is going to finish his 5-year term.
Wow. That's quite an indictment. I mean, the reason that McPherson issue of him saying they intend to attract 10 billion rand and for private sector investments to build energy, communications, water, and transportation. But if you contrast that with the fact that the president is then saying the investment they're hoping to get is going to go into roads, dams, bridges, homes. One is talking public sector, and the other one is saying you don't really know what you're talking about. We're talking about money-making schemes. So already, like you said, it's highly unlikely that he would finish his 5-year term if this kind of schism is already showing based on initial statements being made by both of them in the parliament.
Yeah, to me, the biggest issue is going to be the land issue. When it comes to how they deploy investment funds or foreign aid funds or World Bank or IMF funds, that to me is a battle of the elite, But when it comes to actually giving people a part of the land, that is going to be the challenge. That's where the line is really drawn in the sand. One party saying no, that we oppose that, and the other party was created, in fact, the African National Congress to address that issue. And that's to me, that's going to be the clash where,
values.
Ramaphosa will come upon that wall. He won't be able to answer that question. I mean, right now, there's no focus on it because media are not focusing on it. Of course, as you recall, when because just because they don't talk about it doesn't mean we shouldn't bring it in the news, because if we don't, nobody else will.
Yep.
When Mugabe and Zimbabwe was being demonized during the land seizure, when they were taking the land from Europeans and giving it back to Africans, and they were talking about the violence that was involved in that. In fact, statistically speaking, I think the violence against European farmers in South Africa was probably 5 or 10 times higher than what was going on in Zimbabwe. But that was not covered because they didn't want to say, wait a minute, this issue is not confined to Zimbabwe alone. This issue is in South Africa. This issue is in Namibia. Issues in Kenya, where the European elite still monopolized the land. And that, of course, would have diluted the intensity of the vitriol and focus only that this is exclusively a Mugabe-created problem, you see? So now they're talking about all these infrastructure building and so on and so forth, just in order to avoid addressing the elephant in the room, which is the land. And the article, I think at one point, is talking about the dire economic conditions in South Africa.
Yep.
It's talking about unemployment at 32%. And once again, deceiving readers who are not familiar with the facts. It's 32%, but it's not, the pain is not shared equally. If you look at only the Black African population, it's more like 40% unemployment. The Europeans, who make up 7.2% of the population, their unemployment level is only 7.4%. So why would you not mention that fact? You see, the lies, you lies by omission, see? Leaving the false impression that all South Africans are suffering equally.
And to put a final point to it, it will be a question of when does the country actually have a say about what needs to be done? Because yes, elections have been held.
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. And that is a problem in much of Africa. That's why I keep maintaining that these countries have artificial independence, independence on paper alone. So you see the Financial Times, the Economist, all of them are speaking on behalf of Cyril Ramaphosa. In this case, after he said something, they said he's echoing something which had already been said earlier by the European minister.
Echoes. I mean, it's...
but they're so deep-seated that they don't see it. They have zero sensitivity, number one. Number two, they don't care. They don't care about your trifling feelings,
So it's, we've said it, and tough luck, and
there's nothing you can do about it. Because not many people will translate it explicitly and make clear what they're actually saying. So think about it. It took 30 years, then the history of apartheid disappeared, as if there was not apartheid. When is the last time they mentioned apartheid?
Hardly ever.
Right? And the brutality of apartheid. They only bring it up, and they're very good at what they do, I have to admit. When they bring up apartheid, they always say when Mandela became the first president, and what did he do? He had a government of national unity. You see? Without elaborating that why did he see the need to have a government of national unity?
Wow.
What had happened for centuries, and then particularly in 1948, after apartheid became official? It's all gone. You know?
Yeah.
So you read The Economist, you say, oh, I read The Economist, but you're not really reading it because you're not reading it carefully. You read the Financial Times, but you're not really reading it. You're just looking at the words.
You're browsing.
Exactly, you're browsing. You're reading, but you're not reading. Yeah. You know?
Read the language.
Yes, you need to read in capital letters, not just R is capital and then EAD is lowercase. No, it has to be all caps, bolded with exclamation marks. Otherwise, we will perish, I'm telling you.
Okay, speaking of not perishing, we go to Southeast Africa. We go to Mozambique, the land of Samora Machel. And
Yes.
they've been in the news lately, and it's to do with our friend, Mr. Kagame. Again, this story comes from the Financial Times, and the story is titled Total being the oil firm from France, hands security contract for 20 billion Mozambique's gas project to Rwanda state-linked business. Kigali pursues commercial expansion in the country after its army helped put down Islamic insurgency. Put a pin in that one. I would shed some light there. Raula Kalaf, editor of the Financial Times, select her favorite stories in this weekly newspaper. And this story was filed in by Tom Wilson in London. A security company backed by the Rwanda's ruling party has been hired to guide Total's energy giant's gas project in Mozambique as Kigali continues its commercial expansion in the country 3 years after its army helped put down an Islamic insurgency. After an attack by Islamic insurgents on the neighboring town of Palma killed dozens of people, including foreign contractors working on the project, Total declared force majeure and paused the project in 2021. Rwanda has subsequently deployed more than 4,000 troops to secure the region under an agreement between Mozambique's President Philip Nyusi and his Rwanda counterpart, Paul Kagame. The former rebel commander has crushed political opposition in the country, but has won praise in some circle, that's referring to Rwanda, for improving Rwanda's economy and building a ruthlessly efficient bureaucracy. He was recently elected for a fourth term this week, winning 99% of the vote, according to preliminary results, after which at least 3 prominent opposition candidates were banned from running. There are many unanswered questions about the arrangement between Maputo and Kigali related to the Rwanda security deployment in Cabo Delgado. The total lack of transparency feeds ongoing speculation about the kind of concessions, contracts, and forward mortgaging of LNG income flow that has been secured by Rwanda interests. ISCO Global is one of the several Rwanda companies to have established subsidiaries in Mozambique since 2021 in sectors including security, construction, and mining. The parent company, Intersect Security Company, was established in 1995, a year after Kagame's RPF took power from the Hutu-led government. Intersect is a subsidiary of Crystal Ventures, an investment group founded by the party which dominates many parts of the Rwanda economy. What do you see happening here?
Okay, well, Mozambique, the article is actually telling us that Mozambique, which, by the way, I don't even know the total value of that liquid gas find, one of the largest in the world.
The world, yeah.
So let's go with 20 plus billion, right?
Okay. Yeah.
There's no way that Rwanda is not going to get at least 10% of that in the long run, right?
Because of the muscle.
Absolutely. Without it, without I'm Kagame, I would say without my soldiers, there's no money for anybody, right?
Yeah.
So why should I not be entitled to 10%? Otherwise, I'll just withdraw my troops, and that's it.
That's 2 billion.
But of course, he needs them just as much as they need him. They need each other. Total needs, so of course, Kagame is going to exact some tribute from Total, and Kagame is going to exact some tribute from the Mozambique government of President Philip Nyusi as well, because Rwanda, Kagame would also say, without my soldiers, these rebels would march all the way to the capital, and you would not be present either. So Kagame is sitting good when it comes to dealing with both the government of Mozambique as well as Total Energies of France. He's sitting well. He is probably consulted on the business decisions that are being made by Total. Not personally, of course. I mean, I'm sure he has appointed somebody who is his eyes and his ears. No, I mean official. Probably he has an official person involved through the security company, but also in Total Energies company itself. Just without even looking at the details, I'm sure there are some positions there where Rwanda nationals are working, right? He's reputed to be very efficient when it comes to getting involved in these organizations. There's no way would I be securing the resources for them and not having them employ some of my nationals in prominent positions. I would not allow that. So I haven't looked into it, but I'm sure that is the case.
Okay.
And then obviously you cannot deploy 4,000 soldiers in another country without your own officers being integrated in their intelligence services, their security services, because you would need to know the political condition within Mozambique as well. Is this government stable enough? Are we going to have this government collapse? And then we have 4,000 of our soldiers trapped somewhere in the country. We can't get to an airport to deploy them. Are they, is the government going to collapse to a hostile military regime that may want to see us as enemies? So I'm sure all these considerations have already been factored out. So he's fully integrated in Mozambique. And given the pressure that he's facing with regard to Congo, as you know, Congo
M23
has alleged very credibly with evidence that Rwanda supports M23 because it needs instability in Eastern Congo to continue extracting resources that it has become very dependent upon for its own economy. And then, of course, you are losing some of the revenue now that the United Kingdom is suspending that deportation program that was also very lucrative for Rwanda.
Yeah.
That is now gone. So obviously, I would not be surprised if, in fact, Kagame has already contacted the CEO of Total and saying, you know what, we need to revise the rates at which we are providing you guys security. Oh, definitely. Think about it. It's just common sense,
There's inflation in the African market.
Yes.
And the reason at the beginning there, when they say Islamic insurgents, it's also important to understand that the area where this oil, with this gas was found, the population there are Muslims. And so they've had to resettle them. And I think one of the problems was the resettlement package was nothing to write home about.
Absolutely. And now you see how they play the Islamic card, right?
Yes.
All you have to do is mention Islamic, and that is supposed to see as something negative, the boogeyman, right?
Yes.
But you hit upon something which was much more important and critical. That is one of the most neglected parts of the country.
Yes.
And they actually had genuine grievances. And that is why...
Which has been masked.
Absolutely. As religious insurgency. That's not the case.
Using the
In fact, when the insurgency started, they were only attacking government infrastructure. Only,
yeah.
I became very suspicious that at some point they started targeting civilians, I wonder if those attacks were being perpetrated by the same set of individuals and leadership who launched the insurgency and had clear political agenda to redress their grievances, and were only attacking government targets. It's not unusual, as you know, in these type of conflicts to be co-opted, where you have the agent provocateurs.
Yes.
They deliberately target civilians so that you are then blamed with those attacks, and then justifies to get more people involved in the fight against quote unquote Islamic terror. You saw at some point they were considering bringing British forces, American forces. The Mozambique president was running around the world trying to get these Western forces. But of course, as you know, that is politically very difficult to sell, having Western forces deployed in an African country in the 21st century. I mean, they still do it. I mean, they use proxies, or they come in and they go out like they did in Libya. But to deploy, to provide permanent security, such as what Rwanda is doing, that was not sellable. So the solution was to go to Kagame, and he's now providing those services.
And so, speaking of services, we go south, a bit north, to your favorite general.
Yes.
The land of Uganda. So again, it's Total. They seem to be everywhere.
Yes.
And this story comes from Radio France International.
Right.
So Total Energy oil projects devastating from Uganda National Park, the headline reads, according to an NGO. Production has yet to begin, but Total's energy controversial East African oil project is already taking a dire environmental toll on Uganda's largest national parks, a leading conservationist group said Friday. Despite opposition from environmentalists and rights lead activists, the French energy giant is pushing ahead with its Tilenga drilling project in Uganda and a 1,443-kilometer crude oil pipeline to transport its output to the Tanzanian coast. The $10 billion project involves drilling more than 400 oil wells in 400 oil wells in western Uganda, many of them in Murchison Fall Nature Park, a biodiversity reserve, and the country's largest national park. According to environmentalists, they said the project is already severely impacting wildlife and the fragile ecosystem in the park just a year after drilling began and before production gets underway next year. Maintaining that over 120,000 people have been displaced by the project in Uganda and Tanzania, Nabiruma said she was hoping for justice, and in that case, and lamented that many have been unable to replace all or parts of their land. In a statement to AFP, Total Energies insisted that its projects in East Africa certainly does not involve moving hundreds of thousands of people. It insisted that many with land along the pipeline will be able to use it after the works, adding that 775 households will be rehoused in the vicinity and in better conditions, end quote. Meanwhile, AFIEG reports, which relied on satellite image analysis and interviews with locals, tour guides, civil society actors, and biodiversity experts, documented serious environmental issues. It found that vibrations from the drilling wells were chasing elephants into surrounding communities where they were destroying croplands and increasing running into humans. At least 5 persons have been killed in such encounters last year. The report also said lights mounted on the rig, which could be seen across nearly 14 kilometers, was negatively affecting natural and light-sensitive wildlife like leopards and lions. This is indeed shocking.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that because we do not have any environmental impact assessment of the Total operations in Mozambique. I would like to know that as well, because obviously there you have massive major construction too on the land, and then a lot of it on the sea as well. So I never thought about that. So we should look into that as well. But in the Uganda one, the article lays that clearly. And obviously, you mentioned the publication which has published this. This is definitely not The Economist or the Financial Times, because this is actually looking at it from the other side, those who point out the damage that unchecked capitalism can do. So that's why you would not find an article like this in the Financial Times or in The Economist with very specific data about the consequences of what Total has been doing in Uganda. And I like the public relations, because, most of people, and then, listeners, if you didn't know, a lot of the people in public relations for the major corporations are people who were once good journalists, you see. So they know how to spin words and to spin the story and to turn it upside down or downside up, right? So you've been being told that 120,000 people have been displaced in Uganda and Tanzania, according to Madame Nabiruma, who works for the Environmental Impact Organization.
Yeah.
And Total does not deny it, but they actually deny it without denying it. So they say Total's work certainly does not involve moving hundreds of thousands of people. But they're not denying that our work has actually displaced them by forcing them to move on their own. Oh, it's just amazing. That's why I say it has to be read in capital letters, bold with exclamations. But it takes practice. After a while, you can start reading through their lies and deceptions, mostly deceptions, because they really don't lie. It's not really a lie. He's being honest. We are not moving hundreds of thousands of people. That's a fact, right? But you're forcing them to flee, right? With elephants chasing after them. You see? But this project is under a lot of pressure. I think a few weeks ago we discussed an activist who had been arrested and tortured. who was opposing this project, been arrested. I think he protested outside the parliament buildings in Uganda.
And they
Tortured so
said,
severely that he had to spend time in hospital.
and they said
So
he concocted the story of him.
exactly, he sort of manufactured these wounds upon himself. But the protest has been global. There've been global protests, not only in Uganda alone, in France itself, in other European countries. And as a result of that, many of the companies who initially had committed to ensure the project have backed out. Many of the Western banks who were after profit, looking to get their share of a piece of the cake, right, as King Leopold said, they too have backed out. These banks have backed out, the major banks. And that is why General Museveni has now had to run to China. And there was a spin article, Loba, where the Ugandan, I think it was the government newspaper, said China very receptive to project. And then when the government newspaper spun it that way, a few Western outlets also then picked up the story, and they were misled by the government newspaper into saying that China had actually agreed to finance, because they still need, I think, $3 billion that China had agreed to finance, to offer that financial gap. And then they quoted the Ugandan minister saying, we think that by April 2024, we would have struck a deal. And obviously they're thinking if they publicize it like that, since China did not reject it outright, that would, force China's hand.
Back to the table, yeah.
But China is not in the business of throwing $3 billion around, particularly when China is also observing the politics on the ground in Uganda. The guy's been there 38 years. China observed the 2021 elections and could see obviously that this guy did not win, stole the election from Bobby Wine, and that the election of 2026 is probably going to be even much more intense if he survives until then. And then as we speak right now, there's an ongoing protest in Uganda against corruption, against parliament, that is echoing the ones that have been going on in Kenya.
Yeah.
It's being organized by Generation Z on social media. So you can't go and arrest any of the leaders. So in fact, when the protest started yesterday, they just grabbed anybody who was showing up at the protest, Since there are no leaders you can go after, right? So I think they arrested 20 plus something and brought them to court. So you're arresting the people that are protesting against corrupt officials, but you are not arresting the corrupt officials. And in China, corruption is a big deal.
Yeah.
In China, public officials who are convicted of corruption are executed. They're shot on the back of the head, right? That's how they're executed in China. So you think China is eager to attach itself with this kind of regime right now? Maybe at one point in the past, but right now, I don't see China giving that money as a result of the protest, and then as a result of having well-prepared people like Nabiruma. And if you read the details that she's providing, it's very I don't see how any major financier or bank would want to be involved in this project.
Especially the fact that she touched on some key aspects that he knows will touch the heartstrings of the European readers.
Yes,
the
absolutely.
Fact that the ecodiversity is being impacted.
Yes,
the
absolutely.
People, the environment, and then it's like animals.
Yes.
So it's like you could see she uses.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. vibrations,
Yeah,
vibrations causing elephants to flee, and the light flares causing
exactly.
leopards, you know.
And lions at night not to have. Come on,
No, the European activists are not going to have that, man. What's her name? Greta, you know.
Exactly, Greta Thunberg.
Greta Thunberg is not going to have that.
Of course not. So I mean, like you said, sometimes depending on what
You see, part of the problem is that, you know, the dictator works, his mind is still in a different era. The days of, you know, just a outright military brutish dictator monopolizing the armed forces and the police forces and thinking that's enough. The world has changed dramatically.
A lot.
Look, William Ruto is the commander-in-chief of the Kenyan armed forces, correct?
Yeah, correct. That's the fact.
The youth forced him to eat crow, to back off his tax hike program, correct?
Yeah,
legislation.
Correct,
And now he's trying to think about how can I fill in the $2.7 billion
whole
budget deficit. It's a very serious issue. Even though he monopolizes the ability to sow terror, which he did initially, right?
Yeah.
Leading to so many deaths, right? So for General Museveni to think he can somehow get away with it in Uganda, you know, he has certainly appetite, much more so than Ruto, you know, for killing civilians, and he's unleashed that in the past. But we operate in a different time.
And times have changed.
When our 81-year-old United States president would-be candidate has to bow out, and you, in fact, are 100% dependent on the United States. See? So even though he talks revolutionary, he's actually a ward of the United States. Many people are not aware. Uganda receives $1 billion every year in direct subsidy from the United States. This is not the World Bank or the IMF. This is from official United States aid to the Ugandan government. You see? So the United States can switch it off like that for him.
Yeah.
And that is the problem of being so dependent on outside donors. They call them development partners. They're not development partners. You know?
Another buzzword. Another buzzword.
They're your benefactors. You can't call them development partners. Their development does not depend
on you,
on your development. In fact, their development depends on exploiting you, right? So he's in a bind. I personally don't believe this project will succeed. It may take on another form after. I can imagine maybe, let's say we have Bobby Wine is sworn in as president, either before or after the next election, and there's so much pressure for jobs and unemployment. Is he in a position to scrape the program totally? There could be so much pressure on him that even he himself can't just scrape it totally and say, let's do this and that and that,
or downsize
and downsize it and make it address all these other issues, right?
Environmental issues, yeah.
But even that, even with the, you know, the exuberance, euphoria that he may enjoy and publicity and support from the masses in Uganda, the same Bobby Wine government would still have to contend with the protest that is from outside Uganda by the activists that are outside. And those could still make it impossible to get the financing for this project. And that is why they should actually be looking into clean energy.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you mentioned him, so we might as well go there. Final story goes to Kenya, and in fact, you've touched on majority of aspect of the article itself, which is this one comes finally from the Financial Times, and it says Kenyan populist president has misread the popular mood, with domestic politics marring his polished international image. William Ruto offers lessons to other leaders. In May, William Ruto, Kenya's president, was being feted by the White House at a glittering gala dinner hosted by Joe Biden in the first state visit by an African leader to the US in 16 years. By July, Washington's favorite dinner guest was facing a popular revolt at home. He fired his cabinet and jettisoned
No,
tax
but
raising.
they're disingenuous. They should have said both of them were facing rebellion.
Okay,
and as a result, Biden is actually out now. And that was so both of them who were at that, fetting,
yeah.
for different reasons, of course, felt domestic rebellion. But please go ahead.
So he fired his cabinet and jettisoned tax-raising legislation after nationwide protests culminated in the storming of parliament. Ruto is not the first leader whose polished international image fails to reflect his sinking domestic reputation. I think you're referring to Biden here.
Correct.
But he's also a stark example of the difficulty of reconciling global obligations. And Ruto swept to power in 2022 on a populist swell after appealing to the nation's hustlers, those scrambling a living through their wits and hard work in a nation of 56 million with only 3 million formal jobs to go around, reaching out to the masses in the informal economy. The street hawkers, shoe shiners, day laborers, subsistence farmers, market women, Uber drivers, and so on was electoral dynamite. Ruto ran without the endorsement of his incumbent, Uhuru Kenyatta, but he used his mass appeal to open the doors of his state house, and in many ways, his electoral revolution was commendable. But he's no saint, to be sure. He made a fortune alongside politics and survived an indictment by the International Criminal Justice for alleged orchestration of political violence, but his appeal to an unprecedented underclass transcended ethnic rivalries that has been tirelessly exploited by Kenya's political class. And so now we know what the problem is. So it's an issue of the fact that he wants to balance the books, which is a tough ask. And in so doing, he's decided, you know what, I am going to hit the people who will suffer the most, the underclass. And the article says of 56 million people, only 3 million people have formal jobs. So basically, the rest of people are surviving hand to mouth. Now, how you will credibly go to them and ask that you raise 2-point-something billion is beyond me. What do you say, sir?
Okay, so those are obvious, considerations, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
What is much more, this article is fraught with danger for Ruto. If you read it in capital letters, bold exclamation marks, 99% of what they're writing about is very obvious.
Yeah.
Obviously, Kenya is heavily indebted. I think I don't know what component is domestic or foreign, but the total debt I think is almost like $60 billion, right?
Yeah, in excess of, actually.
Right. So now think, servicing the debt alone is eating up, I think they say 30%.
30% of GDP.
Of revenue, I think.
Yeah.
Of what they collect. So they're essentially saying that since you can't raise the money from the masses, we don't see how you're going to survive.
Yes.
Really.
Underlined. Yes.
That's what they're
in between
saying.
the lines. Yeah. Yeah.
But the money has to come from somewhere, right? You
Because
can't lay off enough people to
make up that
make up
shortfall.
$2.7 billion.
Yeah.
You can't.
Mm-hmm.
And why I say that it's fraught with danger, why are they mentioning the ICC indictment for the first time recently?
Yeah. Wow.
He should be very scared of that. It could mean a couple of things. It could mean, number one, you have to find a way to pay the debt. You just have to.
Yeah.
Because not many people know about the ICC case for which Ruto and
Uhuru
Kenyatta went to The Hague several times to appear at the hearings, the trial, there was a trial. Many people think they were acquitted. They were not. Ruto was not acquitted. The case was suspended.
Yeah.
And a suspended case can be resumed at any point. You see? So are they saying that if you don't find a way to make sure that these loans are paid,
things can happen?
Find a way to revive these cases? Right? That's my only reading there. But then on the other hand, you're giving Ruto tough choices now because he's a smart guy too. And he reads this thing. And he knows, they don't just write an article and then the editor says, oh, could you put in the ICC in a paragraph over there? It doesn't work like that. Right? It's discussed. They know why they're putting it there. There's a reason why they're putting it there. So to me, that was the most important reference in this entire article. So as they say, watch this space going forward, right? But it's definitely not good for him that they're referencing the ICC indictment.
There's still some unfinished business.
Ruto is in a very tight spot. I think he may survive if he has, a government of national unity. And perhaps he's trying to pave the way by firing his entire cabinet, which he already has done.
But he's rehired most of them.
That's a problem because you need to find a way to work with a person like Odinga, even though something is going on though. But because Odinga, Raila, the last statement that I read last week, he was saying, okay, Ruto must go, but then what? We can't just have a vacuum. So,
true.
We have to be careful when we keep saying Ruto must go, Ruto must go. So obviously he's not taking advantage of the crisis because he knows things could actually get worse, you see? So it means he's either willing to play a role, but why would Raila play a role? Because I like putting myself in people's shoes to see how it would act, right?
Okay.
If I'm in Raila's shoes, I'll say, okay, you've been president for 2 years now, right? Let's find a way for you to, to survive another year or so. And then, let's find a way for me to become president. But it should not take, the whole 5 years.
But the West is not going to be open to that concept.
Yeah, but Ruto is such a weak position right now that
yeah, but still, the West will not be open to the idea of an Odinga
presidency. But
nah.
the power is now on the streets in Kenya, and if the people on the streets see that Raila is much more tolerable than Ruto, the rest will also have to swallow some bitter pills.
Yeah, but then the thing is, if he comes on,
it will just be because he can say that in my lifetime I was president of Kenya too. He's not going to be in a position to do anything radical.
Yeah, but then even if he gets in government, he won't be able to do anything radical because
No, but that's what I just said.
Oh, okay.
That's exactly what I just said.
Oh, okay.
He would only want to get there in order to say that in my lifetime, I was also president of Kenya.
Okay. Beyond that, there is no other hope.
Absolutely not. Yeah. That one, even the West would say, anything radical, even the West would say, to hell with the Kenyan youth. They would rather have Ruto lock them up.
Anyway, thank you very much for this week's episode. We've come to the end, but before you leave, the seismic event that happened in the United States, do you have just 2 minutes to give us your initial take, and then maybe
absolutely. I think, obviously, the Democrats, the prospects.
We're talking about the possible nomination of Vice President Kamala.
No, but it's a continuation of what had happened. The Democrats were in the doldrums after Biden's performance at the debate, where it became clear that his age had long ago caught up with him. Trump took leads in many of the critical states that a U.S. president must win. So the Democrats were in the pits. And then Trump survives an assassination. And you know the way he would spin it.
Yeah.
I'm untouchable. Right? Almost like a rapper. You can't touch me.
Yeah, fight was the...
And that energized his base even much so.
The T-shirt.
He started widening his lead over Biden in the critical states. Pressure, drumbeat. Biden, step down. Biden, step down. Biden is no. And then Biden steps down and endorses his vice president, a woman of African and Indian ancestry in this country, a black woman, right?
Nation of immigrants.
And suddenly, the euphoric expression of the Democratic Party leadership and Democrats in general, the voters, record fundraising. Within a few days, $100 million raised to support the presidential candidacy of Kamala Harris. So, really, it's enough to make you dizzy what has transpired in the United States in the last few weeks. And now the latest polling shows that in head-to-head polling, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are dead even now. So it's revived hope in the Democratic establishment. It's going to be a very interesting campaign period and election in November.
And I hope in the course of our programming, maybe up and running to the election, we'll do like a 5-minute segment of what the latest is.
Oh, yes. I think that would be a good idea. I support that.
Yeah, because,
I support that totally.
Was it not Thomas Sankara who said women are the mothers of our revolution? You're about to have one in the United States. So, and who said the revolution would not be televised? This one is going to be
Yes,
televised.
without a doubt. Yes.
So thank you, Comrade Milton, for coming through. And until
Aluta continua. See you next week.
It is good night from me too. Good night.